welcome back. I'm Cole Phillips, author of The Adventure of the Twisted Truths and host of The Book and Dagger. And today we're continuing our read along of The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. We are going to be picking up where we left off, Chapter 10, A Warm Welcome. So basically, the dwarves and Bilbo, having escaped the Elven King's dungeons, the dwarves are all stuck in the barrels, and Bilbo has his ring and is riding a barrel. And basically, it's night, and so the elves have piled all the empty barrels on a raft to return them to the men of the lake. And they're coming around a bend in the river and approaching Laketown. And as the sun is coming up, Bilbo, for the first time, sees the mountain far in the distance, the lonely mountain, the mountain. And it's his first. He had come through far and through many adventures to see it, and now he did not like the look of it at all, the book says. So anyway, he listens to the talk of the Raftmen and pieces together the scraps of information they let fall. And as he does so, he soon realizes it was very fortunate ever to have seen it at all, even from this distance. Dreary as had been his imprisonment and unpleasant as was his position, to say nothing of the poor dwarves underneath him, still he had been more lucky than he had guessed. The talk was all of the trade that came and went on the waterways, and the growth of the traffic on the river, as the roads out of the east toward Mirkwood vanished or fell into disuse, and of the bickerings of the lakemen and the wood elves about the upkeep of the forest river and the care of the banks. Those lands has changed much since the days when dwarves dwelt in the mountain, days which most people now remembered only as a very shadowy tradition. They had changed even in recent years, and since the last news that Gandalf had had of them. Great floods and rains had swollen the waters that flowed east, and there had been an earthquake or two, which some were inclined to attribute to the dragon, alluding to him chiefly with a curse and an ominous nod in the direction of the mountain. The marshes and bogs had spread wider and wider on either side. Paths had vanished, and many a rider and wanderer too, if they had tried to find the lost ways across. The elf road through the woods, which the dwarves had followed on the advice of Beorn, now came out to a doubtful and little-used end at the eastern edge of the forest. Only the river offered any longer a safe way from the skirts of Mirkwood in the north to the mountain-shadowed plains beyond, and the river was guarded by the wood elves' king. So you see, Bilbo had come in the end by the only road that was any good. It might have been some comfort to Mr. Baggins, shivering on the barrels, if he had known that news of this had reached Gandalf far away and given him great anxiety, and that he was in fact finishing his other business, which does not come into this tale, and getting ready to come in search of Thorin's company. But Bilbo did not know it. Anyway, so the raft docks on the shore, and the elves leave, and Bilbo proceeds to then start popping open the barrels to try to pull the dwarves out. So they're moored, and soon men would come down from the south and take some of the casks away, and others they would fill with goods that they had brought to be taken back up the stream to the wood elves' home. In the meantime, the barrels were left afloat while the elves of the raft and the boatmen went to feast in Laketown. So Bilbo, the first dwarf that Bilbo pops out is Thorin. But you could only have told it by his golden chain and by the color of his now dirty and tattered sky blue hood with its tarnished silver tassel. It was some time before he would be even polite to the hobbit. "Well, are you alive or are you dead?" asked Bilbo quite crossly. Perhaps he had forgotten that he had had at least one good meal more than the dwarves, and also the use of his arms and legs, not to speak of a greater allowance of air. "Are you still in prison, or are you free? If you want food, and if you want to go on with this silly adventure, it's yours after all, and not mine. You'd better slap your arms and rub your legs, and try to help me get the others out while there is a chance." Thorin, of course, saw the sense in this, so after a few more groans, he got up and helped the hobbit as well as he could. So they floundered through the water, and they knock on the barrels to find out which dwarves are inside, but only 6 dwarves answer, so they then proceeded to just start popping open all the barrels. Dwalin and Balin were 2 of the most unhappy, and it was no good asking them to help. Bifur and Bofur were less knocked about and drier, but they lay down and would do nothing. Fili and Kili, however, who were young, for dwarves, and also been packed more neatly with plenty of straw into smaller casks, came out more or less smiling, with only a bruise or 2 and a stiffness that soon wore off. Anyway, Fili says he hoped he never smells an apple again because his tub was full of them, and he says he could eat anything in the world right now for hours on end, but not any apples. Anyway, so Fili and Kili and Thorin and Bilbo at last discover the remainder of the company and got them out. Poor fat Bomber was asleep or senseless. Dori, Nori, Ori, Oin, and Glen were waterlogged and seemed only half alive. They all had to be carried one by one and laid helpless on the shore. "Well, here we are," said Thorin. "I suppose we have to thank our stars and Mr. Baggins. I'm sure he has a right to expect it, though I wish he could have arranged a more comfortable journey. Still, all very much at your service once more, Mr. Baggins. No doubt we shall feel properly grateful when we are fed and recovered. In the meantime, what next?" Bilbo suggests Laketown, because what else is there? So the dwarves and Bilbo, they all proceed They cross the bridges, head towards the guard stations because Laketown is a town in the middle of the water, and the only way you can access it is bridges or boats. And they arrive at the guard station where the guards are not really doing their duty. They're just laughing and drinking around a fire in a hut. And they didn't even hear the dwarves approaching, so some help they would be in. But anyway, so the guards, Thorin steps into the hut, and the guards shout, "Who are you and what do you want?" And they leap to their feet and grope around for their weapons, which they can't seem to find. And Thorin says, "I am Thorin, son of Thrain, son of Thror, king under the mountain," in a loud voice, and he looked it in spite of his torn clothes and draggled hood. The gold gleamed on his neck and waist, and his eyes were dark and deep. "I have come back. I wish to see the master of your town." So there was tremendous excitement. Some of the more foolish ran out of the hut as if they expected the mountain to go golden in the night, and all the waters of the lake turned yellow right away. And the captain of the guard comes forward. He points to Fili, Killy, and Bilbo, who have accompanied Thorin, while the other dwarves stayed behind. And so Thorin says, "Fili and Killy are the sons of my father's daughter of the race of Durin and Mr. Baggins, a respectable person who has traveled with us out of the west." "If you have come in peace, lay down your arms," said the captain. "We have none," said Thorin, and it was true enough. Their knives had been taken from them by the wood elves, and the great sword Okris too. Bilbo had his short sword, hidden as usual, but he said nothing about that. "We have no need of weapons. We return at last to our own, as spoken of old, nor could we fight against so many. Take us to your master." "He is at a feast," said the captain. "Then all the more reason for taking us to him," burst in Fili, who was getting impatient at these solemnities. "We are worn and famished after our long road, and we have sick comrades. Now make haste, and let us have no more words, or your master may have something to say to you." So the captain takes 6 men, and he brings them to a great hall. He takes them through the gates and into the marketplace of the town. This was a wide circle of quiet water surrounded by tall piles on which were built the greater houses, and by long wooden quays with many steps and ladders going down to the surface of the lake. From one great hall shone many lights, and there came the sound of many voices. They passed its doors and stood blinking in the light, looking at long tables filled with folk. "I am Thorin, son of Thrain, son of Thror, king under the mountain. I return," cried Thorin in a loud voice from the door, before the captain could say anything. All leaped to their feet. The master of the town sprang from his great chair, but none rose in greater surprise than the Raftmen of the elves, who were sitting at the lower end of the hall. Pressing forward before the master's table, they cried, "These are prisoners of our king who have escaped, wandering vagabond dwarves that could not give any good account of themselves, sneaking through the woods and molesting our people." "Is this true?" asked the master. As a matter of fact, he thought it far more likely than the return of the king under the mountain, if such a person had ever existed. "It is true that we were wrongfully waylaid by the Elven King and imprisoned without cause as we journeyed back to our own land," answered Thorin. "But lock nor bar may hinder the homecoming spoken of old. Nor is this town in the Wood Elves' realm. I speak to the master of the town of the men of the lake, not the Raftmen of the king." Then the master hesitated and looked from one to the other. The Elven King was very powerful in those parts, and the master wished for no enmity with him, nor did he think much of old songs, giving his mind to trade and tolls, to cargoes and gold, of which habit he owed his position. Others were of a different mind, however, and quickly the matter was settled without him. The news had spread from the doors of the hall like fire through all the town. People were shouting inside the hall and outside it. The quays were thronged with hurrying feet. Some began to sing snatches of old songs concerning the return of the king under the mountain. That it was Thror's grandson, not Thror himself, that had come back did not bother them at all. Others took up the song, and soon it rolled loud and high over the lake. "The king beneath the mountains, the king of carven stone, the lord of silver fountains, shall come into his own. His crown shall be upholden, his harp shall be restrung, his halls shall echo golden, the songs of yore resung. The wood shall wave on mountains, and grass beneath the sun. His wealth shall flow in fountains, and the rivers golden run. The streams shall run in gladness, the lakes shall shine and burn. All sorrow fail in sadness at the mountain king's return." So they sang, or very like that, only there was a great deal more of it, and there was much shouting as well, and the music of harps and fills mixed in with it. Indeed, such excitement had not been known in the town in the memory of the oldest grandfather. The wood elves themselves began to wonder greatly, and even to be afraid. They did not know, of course, how Thorin had escaped, and they began to think their king might have made a serious mistake. Anyway, so the master sees there's nothing else for him to do except for obey the general clamor, for the moment at any rate, and to pretend to believe that Thorin was what he said. So he gave up his own great chair to Thorin, and set Fili and Killy beside him in high places of honor. Even Bilbo was given a seat at the high table, and no explanation of where he came in. No songs had alluded to him, and even in the obscurest way was asked for in the general bustle. Anyway, so the dwarves and Bilbo, they stay in Laketown, and they get food and clothing and rest, and every time they show up, the people cheer if a dwarf even shows his nose. And so they make a great fuss over Bilbo. Of course, they pat him on the back and they praise him, talk about what a great guy he is. Bilbo is not enjoying any of this, however, because he has a cold from riding in the river and being cold. So he just sneezes after the speeches at the banquets and says, "Thank you very much." Anyway, so the Wood Elves go back to the Elven King with their cargo, and they tell the Elven King about this, of course. But now the Elven King knows what the dwarves are up to. They're trying to reclaim the mountain. So he says, "Very well, we'll see. No treasure will come back through Mirkwood without my having something to say in the matter. But I expect they will all come to a bad end, and serves them right." He, at any rate, did not believe in dwarves fighting and killing dragons like Smaug, and he strongly suspected attempted burglary or something like that, which shows he was a wise elf and wiser than the men of the town, though not quite right, as we shall see in the end. Anyway, so he sends out spies, and after a fortnight of staying in the town, Thorin begins to think about departure, so he speaks to the master and his counselors and says that he and his company must soon go on towards the mountain. So the master's actually surprised and a little frightened, and he actually thinks, oh, maybe this guy's for real. But he's not at all sorry to see them go because they're expensive to keep. And them being there has basically turned it into a holiday for everybody, so nobody's working and nothing's getting done. He's not getting tax money, so he's the typical greedy politician. Anyway, so he says, "Certainly, O Thorin, Thrain's son, Thror's son, you must claim your own. The hour is at hand, spoken of old. What help we can offer shall be yours, and we trust to your gratitude when your kingdom is reclaimed." So one day, though autumn was now getting far on, the winds were cold, and leaves were falling fast, 3 large boats left Laketown, laden with rowers, dwarves, Mr. Baggins, and many provisions. Horses and ponies had been sent round by circuitous paths to meet them at their appointed landing place. The master and his counselors bade them farewell from the great steps of the town hall that went down to the lake. People sang on the quays and out of windows. The white oars dipped and splashed, and off they went north up the lake on the last stage of their long journey. The only person thoroughly unhappy was Bilbo. That is chapter 10, and next time we'll be reading chapter 11, On the Doorstep.